In this episode of the Happiness Challenge, we're going to be covering the biggest myth that people have about happiness, and that it's something you can find. If we look at every culture in the world, from Israel to Ireland to Iraq, everyone agrees that happiness is the most important thing for them to find and integrate in their life. But when you start looking at the statistics, 54% of Americans, when being rated on their level of happiness, barely scrape by, with moderately being happy, not feeling fulfilled, not feeling like their days mean something. Now that's a big hit, because happiness is not just an emotion, it's not just a good feeling. But happiness correlates and is tied into many, many other areas of our lives that really matter. How much money we make, how close and enriching our friendships are, how many friends we have, how charitable we are, how involved we are in our community, how healthy we are. Our levels of happiness actually impact our immune system, making it stronger or weaker, and it actually affects our lifespan. Our quality of life, how long we walk on this earth, is based on how happy we are ultimately. So it's not just a feeling, it's really important. But a part of the problem of why happiness is so hard to find is because it can't be found. Now you think about the way that we talk about happiness. It's something, like I said, something to be found, or, the pursuit of happiness. But that's the wrong way of thinking about happiness. Because when we're looking for happiness, when we think about it in those terms, that just fuels this need to collect. And I don't just mean objects, but looking for new relationships, a new job, a bigger house, those next set of shoes. And some of these things aren't materialistic, having more friends. It's not my point that it's being materialistic or not. But it's this idea that people believe that in order to become more happy, they need to fill their lives with more and more things, people, events. Now, there's some truth to that, because when we bring in new set of shoes, when we find interesting people to hang out with, even when we get married, these things do make us happy. But a good metaphor for thinking about it is like happiness is a balloon with a leak in it. When you're finding things, collecting happiness, well, what you're doing is you're blowing into that balloon, but it's also leaking. These things do make us happy, but a little bit for short periods of time. Say take the research on marriage. Best case scenario is for 2 years after getting married, your level of happiness is larger. But what ends up happening is it'll go back to the baseline, that natural happiness set that you have before you got married. A better way of looking at happiness is not something that we pursue, it's not something that we discover, but it's something that we build. It's a project, it's a practice in our life that we have to constantly maintain. It's not something that we fill, but it's something that enriches our life. So in this series, I'd like to offer a definition of happiness that I think it can be used as a compass in trying to figure out what does actually make us happy and what doesn't make us happy. And that definition is a sense of a worthwhileness to life, a sense of having a meaningful life that results in contentment and joy. And when you think about happiness in those terms, well, it's easier to see that it's something that you have to build and maintain as opposed to a one-time find. Now, there's two reasons why happiness works the way it does. The first is temperament, and the second is habituation. As far as temperament goes, all of us have, as a heritable quality, a certain temperament. Some people are more agreeable, some less. Some people are more open to experience and ideas, some not so much. Some people are high in threat sensitivity, and some people aren't. That we each have a sort of personality fingerprint that makes us who we are. And happiness goes along with that. That a fair part of who we are as a personality, as a sense of ourselves, is actually our level of happiness, that we do, each and every one of us, have a baseline of happiness. Now, this is a double-edged sword because, well, on the one hand, that means that things that make us happy, they're not going to make us happy for long. But it also serves to protect us, that, and I don't mean abuse or severe trauma, but hardships in life that do affect do affect us, that make us sad, that affect our happiness levels in a negative sense. Well, we're able to bounce back. People are very resilient. So it is a double-edged sword, but the main takeaway point here is that a fair amount of what goes into your feeling of happiness is genetic. The second part to this is that there's a psychological phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, where the happiness that we experience with whatever comes into our life, whether it's marriage, a new friend, or a new pair of shoes, we unfortunately become quickly habituated to that person or thing. We get used to it. You know, you imagine the first time that you walked into your new apartment, just the joy and the beauty you felt, just this is an amazing place to live. And after a while, it started to feel like the last apartment. You know, like I mentioned earlier in the video, the same thing happens with marriage. That true for a good 2 years, a person's happiness level in the best case scenario has definitely been improved. But that baseline of happiness goes back to normal. Now, that doesn't mean you're not happy with your spouse. It doesn't mean you're having problems. It just means that, and it just means that if you were to be asked, well, what's your sense of life generally? That's how you relate to it. Not that things are bad, just the emotional impact it has, how you carry it, you've just gotten used to. In the next video, we're going to be talking about how to get around these two realities that we have to confront and start building happiness, because it can't be found. I hope you like this video. If you do, go ahead and give it a like. If you want, you can leave a comment in the comment box. Describe your tips and struggles and your ideas on happiness. I'd really appreciate to see those. And if you like, you can support my work on Patreon.